Truckers and long-distance drivers of Reddit, what are some of your spookiest/unexplained stories of the road? Not my story. But classic credit from you/Echo5 Juliet. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all two-lane road through total nothingness, except for passing through Amboy, California. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and lava field on one side and a salt flat on the other. It was also, at the time, a hotspot for satanic group activity, so I was driving by myself in the afternoon. I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign, just to prove I was there to friends who dared me to take that route to I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I am driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stopped sideways across both lanes, a suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere and two bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber a round. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it were staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something was just wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable. It was the horror movie move. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive past the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right side of the woman, behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward a couple hundred feet and slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked up into the rearview mirror, I saw that the two bodies had gotten up to their knees and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and bodies. At that moment my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car closer to them. Somehow I do not think it would have been good. Sometimes real life can be scarier than a movie. A semi-truck was passing real slow on a rural road, and I was 12 and decided laying down in the grass would totally hide me, and I needed to hide for reasons. Said reasons mostly being my dad had told me about several local women who were picked up by truckers whilst hitchhiking and never seen again, and Mom's thoroughly instilled fear of kidnapping, and a guy had stopped his car and asked if I wanted a ride along that same road. The guy turned his rig around, during which time I ran and hid in the woods. He pulled over, got out of his truck, and looked through the grass for me. I watched him from behind a tree until he got in his truck and left. Now I wonder about his point of view. He's in the middle of nowhere driving his semi. He sees a kid's body in the grass, so turns around to see what the problem is. When he gets there, nothing to be found. Driving through central Mexico and Jalisco. So my friends and I were on our way to a kind of park in the desert in central Mexico, a couple of hours outside of Guadalajara. This was a real Mexico, not Tijuana, Cozumel, Cancun, or any place like that, so it's really the middle of nowhere. And then around a bend on the side of a hill is a shiny dustless BMW with a flat tire with an entourage of people, a few guys in formal tuxes, women in what looked like either wedding outfits or something equally snazzy. Being a naive gringo, I thought I'd help with the power of my cell phone. My friends said emphatically not to slow down but to speed up, which I did. Apparently that's a popular way you get taken hostage in central Mexico. I was the passenger for this, but on a long drive I accompanied my mom on. We saw a man standing on the concrete divider at about 10 p.m. It was fall, so it was dark out, and pouring rain. He was dressed as a jester, and it was on a stretch of poorly lit highway. She flinched and asked if I saw it. I said that I did, and we watched as he walked slowly along the divider with his arms out a little to the sides. She pulled over because she was freaking out so bad, and he started doing weird stuff, cartwheels and handstands and shit. Weirdest thing ever. One Sunday afternoon, I was jogging along a quiet country road, and it was starting to snow. A Ford Bronco pulling a horse trailer slows down next to me, and the driver asks, "Are you cold?" I say no, because even though I'm cold, you should never show weakness to a stranger. He smiles, and craned his head to look at his horse trailer, then yells, "See, quit complaining. In the horse trailer was the rest of his family, wife, and 4 kids, all dressed nicely like they had just come from church. Upon being chided to quit complaining, 3 of them stick their tongues out at him, and 1 starts crying. The seats in the car were all empty, and to this day I wonder what the backstory was behind that horse trailer incident. Just a couple of months ago I worked a pretty late shift one night. Left the office around 2 a.m. and have a 30 minutes drive home. I live pretty far out in the woodland areas of the country. Forest directly on both sides of the road. I was casually driving along through the fog, and out of nowhere a kid's rubber ball, the basketball-sized ones with cartoons on them, comes bouncing out in the middle of the road from the trees. I slammed on my brakes and swerved to miss because I thought for sure a kid was bound to be chasing behind it. Never seen a soul step out. As I drive on by and started thinking, what would a kid be doing out playing the slate? Then I remembered, there were no houses around where this happened at. Someone had to have thrown it in the road. The height it came onto the road at and the way it bounced, the wind simply didn't blow it in front of me. It was pretty creepy. I was once driving late night from San Antonio to Houston down at 10, probably about midnight. Along this road there is an access road that runs mostly parallel to the interstate, and veers off at an overpass every now and then. When the road veers off, the overpass, which is usually tall enough to let the tractor trailers through, has a pretty steep incline of dirt and concrete forming the hill. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'm driving down the road sort of caravanning with my friend, except he was about 10 miles back because he stopped at Buc-ee's to get gas, so he was far behind me. I noticed there is a car driving at the same speed as me on the access road, veering off at every overpass until I can't see him anymore, and then speeding back up and driving alongside me again and again. At first, I am sort of worried because I think it's a cop. I had a gram with me but hadn't gotten a chance to smoke yet. At one point, the car once again veers off and then back parallel with me until he just takes off, going well over 100 miles per hour I'm sure because I was already going around 75 to 80 miles per hour. An overpass was coming and I expected him to veer off again, except he didn't. He just drove straight on and ramped off the overpass, catching what looked like 15 to 20 feet of air, not to mention the height of the overpass already. I was still behind him so I lost sight of him on the other side because I hadn't passed under the overpass yet. But, when I did pass under, I didn't see anything. Nothing at all. No wreckage, no fire, no trees, bushes, ditches, nothing. It was like it hadn't happened. I pulled off and turned around and looked around the area and I couldn't find any evidence. Weirdest thing I ever saw, but the weirder part is my friend told me he saw the same car doing the same thing when he got to that stretch of the road, only he never saw the car commit suicide like I did. I was driving cross-country on my way home to Maine. I'd had enough interstate driving and decided to take back roads the rest of the way home when I got to New Hampshire. So I'm way out in the boondocks past the White Mountains when I see the most effed up and hilarious thing of my whole life. Up ahead was a small human on a shitty old tricycle, weaving back and forth on the road. I slowed down as to not hit them, and as I went by at a crawl I had to rubberneck several times. It was what appeared to be a midget, had a beard, was dressed like an elf in medieval type clothes and a pointy hat. He was wearing dark glasses and was tapping along the road with a long wooden stick. So yeah. It was apparently a blind gnome on a tricycle. I had been driving all day but didn't feel tired at all. I think it was just some midget with an awesome sense of humor out messing with people. Or maybe he was crazy, I don't know. Back in the early/mid 1970s my mother and I lived in the Pacific Northwest. I was about 6 years old. We were on an offbeat road right out of Seattle. Very dark night. No moon and a wisp of fog. We saw a Volkswagen Beetle on the side of the road with their emergency flashers on and a rather good-looking guy, as my mom describes him, with his arm in a sling waving us down. My mom pulled over, being the kind of woman that would help anybody in need, and he looked normal. Mom rolled down her window and asked if she could help, and the guy asked my mom if she could help him get the last lug nut off his tire so he could change his flat. So my mother introduces herself and he said, "Hello, my name is Ted," and then smiled, then looked at me, reached over and shook my hand and asked my name, and I think I got the bad vibe as well because I said nothing to him. My mom said something about his smile really made her uncomfortable, and then she noticed that he was missing the passenger seat in his Beetle, so she rolls the window back up and said she would call a tow truck to come help him at the next city. then speeds away. While looking in her rearview mirror, she sees him taking off the sling and getting back in the Beetle, and took off very fast in the opposite direction. So that's the night. At 6 years old, I shook the hand of Ted Bundy. My dad had this pickup truck when I was a kid. It was a light green GMC with a camper in the bed. Spent a lot of time in it as a kid. One of the previous owners' names was Clifford Olson. We didn't know if it was the serial killer Clifford Olson, just thought it was a coincidence, although it was registered in the same town Olson lived in. At one point my dad took the carpeting out of the camper, and underneath he found this hammer covered in a mixture of a sticky black substance, and dried on hair. I think this was around the time that Olson had already been caught and had been in court and was set to go to jail. My dad took the hammer to the police, but they told him that because we weren't 100% sure it was the same guy, and that Olson had enough evidence against him anyway, that they didn't need it. A while later my dad found some story about a person who went missing in the area where Olson was operating. They weren't sure it was him, but the one witness who was on the same road at the same time said they saw a green truck with a camper on the back leaving the area. So basically me and my sister spent part of our childhood playing and hanging out in a murder van. Not spooky. Unexplained definitely. I worked as a trucker for a year or so, and had some weird experiences. I'm probably late to this thread, but FCK it. One of the strangest things I saw was just off the Trans-Canada in BC. It was surprisingly dead on the road I was on, nobody going either direction, which was weird, even for a Wednesday in the wee hours of the morning. I found a corner and see a pillar of smoke. My initial thought is that explains the no traffic. I start to slow down since it's kind of a blind corner and see that there is only one car off the ditch, fire blazing. I pull off the road to see if anyone is injured and can't see anyone. On the other side of the clearing is, no joke, 4 or 5 black bears standing on their back legs. As I notice them they all begin roaring just crazily, like I intruded some sort of party or something. I back away back into my truck and watch as they calm down and continue to watch the fire. What happened that morning I'll never know. Bears are weird. I have a lot of weird bear stories. Edit, alright. More bear stories delivering. Gotta think about the best, and this is probably one of my favorite. So again, I'm in the Banff area doing some hiking with some friends. We are doing the usual deal, our backpacks have cans so we are allowed to try and scare off any bears. Well, we start taking pictures because we have a gorgeous view, and selfies. Well, we start to realize we hadn't really been loud in a while, and we're even eating, which we definitely shouldn't have been. Out of the woods strolls up this bear, and it stops and does a kind of hind leg sit like some cats do. I have never ever heard a bear make this sound, but I swear this is the only thing I can relate it to. The bear laughed at us. It sat there and laughed at us as we sat still, scared. One of my friends in selfie pose as he waits for the bear to leave. Eventually the awkwardness makes us all laugh with the bear. The bear must have found this not so funny because he then let out a massive roar which quickly shut us up. He then laughed again, and left. I don't have any. My worst experience was dead stop traffic in Des Moines, Iowa, seeing a 15-year-old kid take a dive off of a 16-foot bridge headfirst into the ground. That was a horrible day. Last winter I worked as a night route driver for a medical courier service. Basically I'd drive way out to rural clinics, pick up biological samples from the Dropbox, and then drive them back into town and ship them to a lab via the 24-hour Kinkos. My route was the same 4 nights a week, but on Thursday, the 5th night of my work week, I had one additional stop, a vet's office out in the middle of nowhere. It added about an hour onto my run because of how far out it was. I seriously don't know how they stayed in business because I only passed like 2 houses on the way there. Anyway, it's around 1 a.m. and I'm heading out to my last stop, the vet's office out in BFE. I get there, park, leave my car running as always, go around to the side of the building, collect the sample, head back to the car, and freeze as I see something rifling through the front seats through the open driver's side window. I think I'm being robbed in the middle of nowhere. My phone is in the cup holder, and I'm about to shit my pants when this thing stops, looks over at me, and then hauls ass back into the woods at the side of the driveway. It had to have been a bear, but it ran on 2 feet. I know bears can walk bipedally, so I'm sure that's what it was, but some little part of me thinks I saw something else. After that, I always drove my car right up to the Dropbox so I didn't even have to get out when I made that pickup. I was once driving back from northern Western Australia and at about 11 o'clock at night, and I noticed this red light off in the distance hanging just above the horizon in my side mirror. I checked it again and again for about 2 hours and it just hung there, following us. No matter how many turns or hills we went over. I decided to stop at a rest spot for a stretch and something to eat. I walked to the road and looked back to see the light was still there, just hanging a little off the top of the road. I pointed it out to my dad who had woken up, and he couldn't make top or tails of it. I never did find out what it was nor have I seen it again. I had just merged into I-25 from US 36 in Denver, and even though the speed limit is 55 miles per hour, nobody drives that slow. Because of the amount of traffic that merges on at the next on-ramp, I usually moved over one more lane. I did this as usual, and a silver Pontiac Aztek had let me into the lane. I gave them a thank you wave, and just then the pickup in front of me hits his brakes hard, and so do I. The truck then swerved to the right just in time for me to see the cars in front of him stopped. I swerved to left while still braking without looking. I missed the car in that lane thankfully, but I looked in my mirror and saw the Pontiac Aztek had clipped one of the cars that was stopped. When it did, it spun and then went into the side of the same car. I called 911 and let them know of the accident, then got off the highway at 58th Avenue and came back around as a witness via the police. When I got back to the site, traffic was stopped and someone had already got out to check on people. I didn't see it right away because of where I parked, but when I got out off my truck there was a guy standing at the driver's side of the Aztek crying, and he had put his jacket over the driver's head. This person was killed from head trauma when their head hit the window. If only I had not been selfish about the traffic merging ahead, this person would have had more stopping room and more distance to react. BTW, not a truck driver, but you do drive around Denver and surrounding areas all day for work. Driving through Virginia on second day of a 4-day road trip. I remarked to my family that it was odd, we hadn't seen another RV of our dated make so far this trip. 2 minutes later, one comes along going the other way. Then I said, you know, we haven't seen any deer this trip. Go around a bend and there's about 6 of them grazing in a glade by the roadside. Okay, I'm on a roll now. Okay then, we haven't seen Santa Claus on this trip. It was July. 5 minutes later, there's a billboard with Santa touting the Christmas store, so I said, we haven't seen $1 million. End of lucky streak. I have another story. Also driving through Virginia on I-81. Different year, same long route. Before I continue, you need to know that in non-Reddit life I have an unusual name that's hard to spell. I was feeling very depressed about life in general and rather aggravated in specifics, needed a restroom stop and there aren't many along that stretch, and my dear husband has an amazing ability to pull into the grodiest gas stations. True to form, the one he pulled into took the cake. No name brand gas, filthy dirty, but I was ready to take what I could get. I head into the restroom stall. Weirdly, it had only one graffiti on the wall, saying God loves looks at clouds. Spelled correctly. Nobody ever spells it correctly, even some family members. I took a picture and laughed the entire rest of the trip. That God is a funny one. Not my personal experience, but my uncle lives out deep in rural Oregon. He told me this story where he was driving to work really early in the morning to a small town about 30 minutes away. There was a bit of traffic just outside of town, so he stopped behind another car. There was super heavy fog this morning, like Silent Hill quality, really thick, so he could just see the backlights of the car in front of him. After following the car very slowly for a while, the car stops once more in the traffic. My uncle sits there and waits for about 20 minutes. The car still hasn't moved. All he can see is the headlights in front of him. Eventually he gets out to see what's the matter. When my uncle gets out and walks to the car in front of him, he sees the entire front of the car completely totaled. Inside was the dead driver. The back part of the car was completely fine, and my uncle did not even know a thing was wrong earlier due to the fog. The story always unsettled me when I had to drive in fog. I was a front seat passenger on a drive from Guatemala City to the west coast of the country. In this very small town, there was a big rig pulling 2 trailers. All of a sudden the truck stops. The next thing I see is the driver walking to the middle of the 2 trailers and dragging a woman he apparently hit to the side of the road and getting back in and driving off. Only he didn't rush like he committed a crime, he walked as if it were just another day. None of these are trucking stories, but they do involve long commutes on country roads. My sis worked about an hour and a half away from my mom's, where she was temporarily staying. At this time, which was bad, because she has a bad habit of falling asleep in cars. So on nights that she worked really late, I made her promise to call me and I'd stay up and talk to her until she got home. One night, late, I'm on the phone with her and out of nowhere she starts screaming. She finally gets out some semblance of a sentence, telling me there was a girl covered in blood, crawling out of the ditch onto the road. She pulls the car back around, and jumps out of the car and runs to her, the phone falling out on the ground. I am still listening. I hear the girl start sobbing and telling her, "Oh God, not you, I need help, they're coming back for me." My sister, at this point, thinks the girl might have a mental issue because of how frantic and disconnected her thoughts are, and because while she keeps saying she needs help, she doesn't seem to think my sister could help her. In hindsight, I think the girl saw my 5'9", 100-pound sister with her high-pitched voice and thought that they could easily kill her too. From here, besides screaming and broken glass, I can only tell it from her side. She sees this truck pulling up and is about to wave them down when the girl goes crazy and starts clawing and pleading with my sis to run. The truck puts on its brights, and two very big men jump out of the car and start walking towards them, making clicking cat-calling sounds, and my sister's blood turns to ice. She reaches over, grabs the girl, no way in hell she's leaving her, and in a whirlwind manages to force her into the car, and jump in herself before the men reach the car and start smashing her lights. She speeds off, clipping one of them, and is followed by this truck trying to run her off the road for about half an hour. They only pull away when she reaches a hospital. Inside, the girl was in a panic and wouldn't let my sister leave her with the doctors. She kept saying she was her best friend and repeating her name over and over. From the doctors, my sister learned that this girl was repeatedly raped and then tied up and drugged behind the truck. To add the creepiness, once my sister got home, she looked at her name tag and remembered that she had left hers at home and had borrowed an ex-employee's tag, Stephanie. And yet, despite my sis saying she didn't recall ever not fearing for her life enough to get to formalities and exchange names, the girl had called her by her real name. Edit: I have been searching for a news link, but haven't found anything. My sister never testified, not because she refused, but because she was never approached or asked to do so. She did give the cops her clothes and they did process her car. This was in the greater Houston area. I believe it was in the fall of 2010. I showed my sister this thread and she is touched by the comments but added that it was much more terrifying for the girl, because all my sister was thinking about was saving her, not the consequences of doing so. That being said, we both, but especially my sister, would like to know the end of the story as much as you all would. If anyone knows any information or finds any, we'd appreciate it. My sister's disclaimer: the last thing she wants is to make this girl relive that moment or to feel violated by the story being told if she has intentionally kept it quiet. Certain identifying details have thus been withheld, as per sister's request. I don't have a spooky story, but I did have a near-miss experience that almost made me crap myself. My dad is my co-driver and we were in Atlanta and it had rained a bit. Traffic is a bit congested but not as bad as Atlanta can get. But then everyone suddenly starts braking and a semi to my left and ahead of me starts jackknifing and his trailer goes sideways, skidding along the road with the length of his truck blocking all three lanes. I brake like I've never braked before. He manages to correct himself, I have no idea, and I manage to squeeze through the gap between his aft and the side of the road and avoid what could have easily been a horrible accident. He goes along like nothing happened. Then my dad, who had been sleeping, reamed me for not keeping enough of a distance to avoid needing to brake so hard, and thus waking him up, and didn't believe me when I told him the awesome scary thing I just managed to avoid. Ugh. My friend and myself were on a road trip. Part of the road trip took us just north of San Francisco, and just south of the area where the Zodiac was supposed to live. For some reason our mapping program freaked out and took us on a long back roadway to our campsite. The road runs through the mountains and is 1.5 lanes wide, meaning that if there is another car coming at you on one of the tight curves, one of you will have to stop, reverse to a slightly wider point, and let the other car pass. Sure enough, we get to talking about the Zodiac. You know, college kids trying to freak each other out. This was a long time ago, but we'd be doing the same thing if it were today. On cue we run into another car. It doesn't turn its high beams off, blinding us. We kidded with each other that it was the Zodiac, blinding us so that he could take us out before we knew what was happening. I reversed to let the car pass. He drives by. It was just a harmless man with his kids in the back, But then I see a flash out of the corner of my eye. I look over at my friend to ask he saw it too, and he was open-mouthed and staring in the same direction. Today we have no idea if it was our minds playing tricks or not, but he got a much better look than I did. Both of us swear we saw a man running off through the forest wearing what? A dark blue jacket. FML, we both figured we were just seeing things, but neither of us ever fully gave it up to a creation of our mind. I might be late. I was riding with some friends and we decided to make a stop at this creepy warehouse that's in this small neighborhood. We drive up to it and this van behind us stops as well and turns on its brights, so we get freaked out and drive off. We felt ballsy, I guess, and decided to go back thinking he was gone. We go back and we look around, nothing, and we decide to not go into this creepy as hell warehouse. So we are driving and I'm extra paranoid and I turn around and all of a sudden I see the same van driving with its lights off, following us on the road. I scream, FCK, the car is back. So we drive off fast and the driver goes to the left and speeds past us and cuts us off. We are completely trapped. He gets out screaming. I thought we were dead. Was he gonna shoot us? Apparently he was a dad who was doing a security shift for the neighborhood because a lot of people try and do drugs in that warehouse or other weird activities. He was pretty nice, but I felt the crazy driving was unnecessary. Around 95 to 97, I was driving to Michigan to visit family. I live in Kentucky. I normally like to drive on long-distance trips like that during the midnight hours because there's less traffic. Passengers usually sleep, which makes for longer hauls in between stops, and quiet. Frankly, I don't like dealing with other people/drivers. There was one big stretch of road going up through Ohio, or maybe Indiana, can't exactly remember, that was going fine and nothing out of the ordinary. I then start noticing a bright light up ahead. I wasn't sure if it was another vehicle or a gas station, but I thought it seemed a lot brighter than usual. As I kept driving, I could tell it was moving and was getting bigger and bigger. I wake my cousin and tell him to check it out. We're both staring as it is clearly moving closer and becoming more brighter and more larger with every passing second. Then suddenly it seemed as if it instantaneously just flew directly over heads and felt as if it was only a few feet above the car. It never made a sound but was moving ridiculously fast and, for lack of a better description, was just like a bright white ball of fire. I watched it move out of the distance through my rearview mirror. Hands down craziest thing I ever saw in my life. I was asleep in the passenger seat on a 9-hour trip home to a small town in northern Ontario. I woke up to my boyfriend yelling at me to wake up. I shot upright and see a homeless man dressed in rags, kinda ghostly looking, running down the middle of the road ahead of us. I was so confused and scared. We're in the middle of nowhere, there's no homeless people who live up here, and it's like 1 a.m. It just didn't make sense. Then my eyes focused and I realized I was staring at the ass end of a moose. Not something you want to see on the road at night, but much less scary than homeless crazy ghost guy. My uncle was a long-haul trucker back in the 90s, mainly did international runs from Canada down into the US and back to Canada, with a pretty nice new Kenworth that had one of those maximum-size sleepers on it. It had a built-in toilet and the works. He decided that the small tank that came with the toilet was a pain in the ass to have to empty so frequently, so he converted half of his passenger-side diesel tank into a septic tank. A few weeks after converting his tank, he happened to pull in at a truck stop somewhere in the States and parked for the night after driving longer than he should have. When he woke up at 5 a.m. with the dawn just starting to get bright, he climbed out to see beside his truck something that makes him laugh every time he tells the story. On the ground on the right side of his truck was a 5-gallon jerry can, a siphon hose with one end in his tank and the other laying on the ground, puddle of puke and some puke footprints, another few feet away, puddle of puke, another few feet away, another puddle of puke. Some dumb sob tried to siphon his septic tank in the middle of the night. Several months ago I saw a huge group of people walking, over 20 people. This was at 3 in the morning, off the frontage road. This isn't really the spooky part. It got spooky when I noticed not one of these people were walking normally. They were stiff in their movements, like the act of walking was foreign to them, and they weren't walking as a group, like they all kept their distance from each other. It's hard to explain. I'll go for one that we just couldn't explain. I was riding shotgun in a car with my ex and her sister on a stretch of road with only marshland/forest around in the pouring rain. I remember so clearly being asked if I liked INXS, and I said I didn't really listen to them but to go ahead because I always liked finding new music, so she put them on. I think we were driving really far to get to a mall or something. I can't really remember, Coming down a hill we saw a man walking towards us, kind of off to the passenger side of our lane, bawling his head off. He had a briefcase above his head to shield him and was dressed in a full nice suit. As we got closer I noticed that instead of a dress shirt he had an excess shirt tucked into his dress pants. He was older and not homeless. I got the impression of a rich man. We just drove by and nobody but me noticed the shirt, just commented on how weird it was. A guy was just in the middle of nowhere, but I thought that was freaky. We didn't see any breakdowns or somewhere he could have come from for an hour in either direction. Also, he was dry. Thinking back to it, he wasn't wet. He would have been muddy all over out in that storm, but he was very much dry. The most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me was on a long drive back to college for my last semester before graduation. I am a night person and was leaving kind of late for the drive but was expecting to get in around midnight. Being that I would be living on my own after school, I was feeling a bit sentimental as it felt like I was leaving home for the last time. Home was somewhere else now. So it's sunset as I am driving towards the highway and there's a beautiful low fog in the fields along the road catching the light. I decide around then that it'd be nice to try for a more scenic backroads route than the typical turnpike stuff, so I decide to cut off towards West Virginia. I stop at a diner, get gas, then proceed towards the WV line as night falls. This is the last human contact I make for the rest of the drive. I didn't foresee it, but an immense, dense fog dropped over Appalachia that night, slowing my drive considerably. At some points in the mountains there was scarcely 10 or 15 feet visibility. But there are some small towns the road leads me through. It's Friday night, though, and it begins to feel oddly dead in each town I pass through. It'd be 9 or 10 p.m. and the local bars would look closed. There were no lights on in any of the houses. I felt uneasy, but maybe that's just how it is there. Anyway, I'm making terribly slow progress with the fog and the back roads at night. Deer sightings keeping my foot a little light when the fog wasn't too bad. But at some points I'd have to nose my way through foggy intersections, unsure if I'd find the other side. It was almost impassably dense at times and the trip would take double the estimated time to arrive because of it. I'm often driving around 25 miles per hour or worse, trying to be safe, and it's around 1 or 2 a.m. and there is no cell phone service as I get into a large national forest. There's no other traffic around. There has been little all night, so I decide to pull over to pee, leaving the engine on for whatever reason. It'd be a quick stop. I'm not fearless by any means, but I try to not let myself get too jumpy in the woods at night. But as I'm coming around the car undoing my belt, I hear voices maybe 40 or 50 yards into the forest, and then there's scrambling through the dead leaves and brush coming in my direction. It's pitch black, night, no streetlights or houses, national forest, cloudy, foggy, starless/moonless night, and I can't see anything off the road beyond the red glow of the tail lights. Feeling sufficiently freaked out and not willing to find out more, I bolt back to the driver's side and floor it up the next hill, happy I had left the car on anyway. My heart is pounding. I never find out more about this little scare, and I'm glad for that. A little while longer and I'm heading up some steep mountains and nearing an old fire watch tower from the World War II days. There's a plaque, roughly, about it being a community morale builder to have built it even if it didn't affect the war in any way. I pulled into the overlook to actually pee because I never got the chance earlier. Now that I'm atop a sizable mountain, I suddenly get cell service and a string of concerned texts from my mom freaking out and asking if I made it okay. By this time I should have been at my house hours ago, but I took a long and unfamiliar way in the dark and intense mist. Knowing that she won't go to sleep until I'm there, she's like that, I respond that I'm safely home, hoping that will end it. She immediately calls me and asks where I am, and I can't really ignore her call, having just texted her. I tell her I'm home and she asks, "In Virginia?" And I say yeah, in my college town, despite being at the top of a mountain in a national forest in West Virginia. She sounds deeply unsettled and says she's been trying to call me repeatedly, while I had no service. I ask why and she says she got a really weird phone call from West Virginia, but way west of where you should have been, which is where I actually was. She said she got this phone call and a gruff young man with a backwoods-sounding voice was telling her he needed to speak to my name, and swearing at her and saying all these nasty things. She said she heard people in the background screaming and people laughing. She hung up and called me a few times, but it went straight to voicemail. She typed the number in Google and saw it was from WV and knew I was at least passing through a small part of it and called the number back. A small child answered and swore at her. Then the earlier voice ripped the phone back and started saying my name again and saying that he needed to speak to me. This is especially strange because I was driving my dad's car and I am not registered to it, so even if they somewhere saw my plates and could run them, they'd get his name. I think I even paid with cash at the diner and gas station way back near the start of the drive 5+ hours earlier and in another state. I can't think of anything I could have dropped with my name on it when I had stepped out of the car briefly earlier during the recent incident. I still had all my cards in my head. It would be an incredibly strange coincidence or extremely elaborate scare prank either way. I do my best to reassure my mom I have no idea what that could be about and that it must be a weird coincidence. I tell her I'm at my house and I'm okay despite how troubling I find all this in reality. She gives me a half-hearted okay and we say good night. I pull out of the watchtower, pull off and continue on into Virginia. Never have I been so comforted by the 3 a.m. dregs of late-night parties, students stumbling home at a nearby university town off a highway I know well from my usual route. I carry onto that highway and make it safely, and things have been completely normal since. But I have never brought it up with my mom again, nor have I ever had the heart to tell her where I was driving that night, or how late, or of the voices in the woods. There's no climax and no resolution. I'm trying to forget. I remember on a long road trip, 14+ hours, with my dad to Colorado, we saw a car barrel past us at like 100 something. Keep in mind it was about 9 o'clock and we still were hours behind schedule, and had a long way to go, with a short time to get there. Now it isn't odd to see bad speeders on the road, but since we were in the middle of nowhere, we had no idea where this guy came from. We continued driving for a few minutes, and saw another car speed past us, at about the same speed. Funny thing was, it looked like the same car. Same color, same model SUV. We shrugged it off as a coincidence and continued. About the same amount of time had passed, and we saw it again, passing us. That time, we were very sure it was the same car. This pattern continued twice more before my dad pulled off into a motel to spend the night, and delay our trip. My dad is usually a very sensible person that's hard to scare, but I've never seen his face so ashen and afraid. He's never talked to me about the incident since, and doesn't allow me to drive after 9:30. I used to go to a school really far away from my hometown with my sister. Our mother drove us. Part of the route was through a wooded area. Whilst looking out the windows we noticed what looked like people just standing by the trees, some actually in the trees. This happened every day for a good year or so, but every day they would be in different positions. They looked real, but we put it down to being mannequins or sort of scarecrows. One day they just weren't there anymore. I've tried looking it up on the internet to no avail. That was about 8 or more years ago and we still don't know what it was, or even why someone would go to that effort. Back when I was maybe 12 years old, my parents had a beat-up Buick Century. The car had this tape/radio in it that was on the fritz and would inexplicably turn on/off/skip around on the radio frequencies. Usually the only way to turn it off was to slap the top of the dashboard hard so it would cut back off. Anywho, we are taking a ride back from Tampa to the east coast of Florida on a long shitty road in the middle of the night. One way each direction and not another car in sight. My mom doesn't like driving with the radio on, so we're just proceeding in silence as she tries to make small talk. Hey look, Tom Massacre. The odometer is flipping the last digits to 666. I glance over and yes, it happens to be. Yeah, as if this road isn't spooky enough. All of a sudden the radio cracks on by itself and has loud static. She looks at me and I look at her kinda shocked, but we were used to it flipping out. Then just as we start to laugh it off, it scans to the Gator Classic Rock station, and is blasting Highway to Hell. We both are like WTF? And start slamming on the dashboard, but shit just won't turn off. And it was on loud. I mess with the dial. Nothing. Just stuck listening to it and being thoroughly freaked out. At this point we are looking out the side windows and expecting things to only get worse when almost as soon as the odometer clicks over to XXX 667 the radio cuts back off and there's silence again. Spookiest shit coincidence that ever happened to me, lol. Well, not me, my daddy. He used to drive with a Santero. He said he was in a little shitty neighborhood doing his load and getting them on the truck. His friend suddenly looked back and told my daddy that they had to go. They finished up and left when they got to a stop sign and the Santero guy told him not to look to his side and my dad obviously did. He said he saw a tall guy dressed in all black with his head tilted down covering his face by a long hat, and my daddy said the weirdest thing was that he had very long white nails. My dad told me he stopped driving with that guy after that. Not a trucker, but once went on a trip to Dallas with my mother. Not sure where we were exactly, it was about midday though. Traffic was almost stopped on the freeway, and I was looking at one of those pedestrian overpasses. You know, the ones that are fenced on the sides and are just for people to walk over? I noticed it from a distance, and it looked like someone was standing on it, dressed in white. As we got closer, I realized that whoever it was had been duct taped to the fence with his arms out at his sides, like he was crucified. He looked black, maybe Middle Eastern, with a white robe and white turban. A black bag sat next to him on the concrete. We stopped a few feet from the bridge because traffic wasn't moving, and I'm fairly certain it was a mannequin, but if it was a good one. My mother looked just as freaked out as I did, and I kept glancing back at it as we drove off. One night about 6 months ago I was driving my sister home, and to get to her house I have to drive 15 miles highway and 6 miles back roads. It's 1 in the morning and I had just dropped her off when I'm at a stop sign waiting to turn out. I see the first set of headlights I had seen since leaving my house. I didn't think anything of it and got on the highway. This is where it got messed up. There are no lights on this highway, just country and the glow of headlights. The dude pulls up right beside me like he's going to pass but just drives alongside me. I speed up, he speeds up. I had finally had enough and rolled my window down and gave him the finger, but I'm shocked at what I see when I roll down my window to look over. It's a guy. All the lights on his old box van, with his eyes open so wide and his mouth open as wide as it can with all of his teeth showing, and he had an old Polaroid instant camera. He kept taking pictures of me because I literally couldn't get away. I finally slammed on my brakes and he kept driving. I got his license plate number and reported it, but the cops just chalked it up to kids playing pranks. Yay, right. When I was 19, my best friend and I, he's a guy, I'm a girl, road tripped around the West Coast for a few weeks of the summer. When we hit Humboldt we set up camp in a state park, then decided to cruise back to town to get some pizza and see if we could spot anyone who looked like they could sell us some bud. After dinner, finding no one and feeling like dorks, we started driving back and, on an exit ramp, spotted a woman with her thumb out. She was so nondescript it was impossible to get a read on her, somewhere between the ages of 25 to 35, straight brown hair, brown pants and a plain blue sweater. Possibly because we were bummed out that the afternoon was ending without any memorable pot-buying shenanigans, we picked her up. She said her name was Trish. She had these very hollow eyes. She spoke very quietly. She carried a small brown leather suitcase. She asked where we were going. We told her. We asked where she was headed. She said, "Oh, I think I'll get a ride into the park with you. I won't sleep in your tent or anything," she assured us. We had a 2-person tent and obviously didn't want a stranger in it with us. We couldn't offer that, it was awkward. We had leftover pizza in the back seat, told her to help herself. She ate it all, quickly and quietly, like she hadn't eaten all day. Get to the campsite. Awkward. She asks what time we're leaving in the morning. Tell her 10. She nods and says she will see us then. Turns and walks into the woods. Disappears. We go to bed. No idea where she is or if she is coming back. In the morning she appears minutes after we get up and start moving around, making oatmeal on the camp stove. She does not look as if she spent a sleepless night in the woods. She looks exactly the same, not a hair out of place, not a pine needle stuck to her sweater. She observes our oatmeal, then disappears again. She returns shortly with 2 hands full of blackberries. This is a crowded campsite and the blackberry bushes are picked clean. My friend and I spent a good half hour foraging the day before and found 3 berries total. We put the berries in the oatmeal, we all eat, pack up, get in the car. Ask where she wants us to drop her off. She tells us to take her back. Back to the very spot where we picked her up. It's not the direction we're going, but it's not far. She looks very sad. She thanks us, she gets out. We wish her well. She says something like, "I doubt it." There was something spooky about the whole thing. But more than that, it was just really sad. I drive a pretty decent stretch of back roads between my home and my university quite frequently. It's like an hour and a half of nothing but farms and trees. Late at night, on a particularly desolate stretch of road, I noticed some flickering lights way ahead of me. As I sped closer, the lights grew more intense until it was a pretty bright glowing. When I was close enough to see what was going on, I saw a bunch of cars and trucks parked off to the side of the road and a huge fire burning in the trees about 30 meters from the road. I stopped, checking out the amazing bonfire. The stack of trees and logs was like 10 or 15 feet high and the flames were easily double that. The fire was so bright that it was hard to look at for longer than a couple seconds, but I could see people moving around just inside the trees. They were packing up chairs and tents and running back and forth between their camp and vehicles, obviously bailing. A mammoth of a man got out of one of the trucks and started waving his hands at me. I tensed up, wondering if I had stumbled upon the wrong kind of party, but the guy just told me it would best to move on as the fire was likely to spread. I realized that the fire had probably started out much smaller and burned out of control. Later that week, on my way back, a huge swath of the woods had burned down. There were still fire and rescue milling around, but it looked as if the flames were all the way out. I still don't know if the people I had seen were caught or owned up to starting a forest fire. Luckily it hadn't spread for more than a few hundred square feet before it was extinguished. Mid-90s I went on a road trip with my son and for some stupid reason decided to take a different route home than the one I had taken previously and was familiar with. Turned out the new route was a super desolate road. I specifically chose to drive in the middle of the night so my son would be sleeping and there'd be less traffic. It's probably 3 a.m. and of course my pa's car breaks down. By some luck of the draw I'm almost right in front of an abandoned roadside market and was able to coast into the parking lot. The windows are all boarded up on the market. Steam is pouring out from under my hood and it was essentially the start to every single dumb chick breaks down in the middle of nowhere and gets hacked to death movie you've ever seen. All of a sudden I see headlights coming around the bend. I'd been driving on this road for a couple hours and had seen maybe 2 other vehicles the whole time. A truck drives past, slows down, then I see the reverse lights come on in my rearview mirror. Deliverance banjo music starts to play in my head. The truck pulls up so our vehicles are driver window to driver window and I see the driver is an older man. And he's just staring at me. He looks like the stereotypical serial killer you visualize, long, scraggly gray hair, grizzled stubble, sorta crazy eyes. He motions for me to roll down my window. I'm just trying to look anywhere but directly at him and acting like I don't see him and everything's fine and dandy. Oh no, I'm not in any distress, please ignore the steam coming from my car, I'm good. Thanks anyway. He backs up a little, parks and gets out of his truck and starts walking towards my car. I'm thinking this is where my son and I end up, a news story about bodies being found in the boonies when the snow melts, and he starts yelling, "I'm not going to hurt you. Roll down your window." I keep looking anywhere but at him while trying to give off strong, "You don't want to mess with me" vibes. In reality I'm about shitting my pants. He gives me a disgusted look, walks to his truck and starts digging around. He comes walking back with tools in his hands and now I'm thinking OMG, he's got tools, he's gonna kill me and bust out my teeth and cut my fingers off so I can't be identified. He yells, "Open the hood." I'm looking everywhere but at him. "Open the hood. Let me see what's wrong." He's pissed. I'm scared shitless. But I reach down and pop the hood. He opens it and I crouch down so I can see him through the couple of inches where the hood is open. He looks up and we make eye contact and I about die. He looks down and keeps doing whatever he's doing. He goes back and forth between his truck and my car a couple more times, bringing more tools, some jug of something and other things I can't make out. After about 15 minutes he closes my hood and yells at me to start it up. My car sputters a little, turns over, and then seems fine. He yells, "Be careful, there are lots of weirdos out here." Gets in his truck, gives me one last disgusted look and drives off. My car made it home. My dad looked it over after I told him the story and deducted the guy had changed the radiator hose. My dad pointed out many times that the chances of me being struck by lightning were probably better than my chances of some random guy in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night happened to be driving around with a radiator hose and the tools to replace it for whatever 10-plus-year-old past foreign car I had been driving was. Coming home from work one night, around 11 p.m., about a mile from home, I come up to police lights, fire trucks, ambulances. Then some car wreckage. Everyone always rubbernecks accidents like these. After this one, I don't do it anymore. I had my window down, and just as I was at my closest to the accident, I had a clear view of the driver's side door of one of the cars. A woman was on her knees in the street, with her arms around her teenage daughter who was slumped half out of the driver's seat. The daughter was unconscious and covered in blood. Just as I'm driving past I heard the mother scream, "Oh God! Please don't take my baby." Her hysterical tone of voice continues to chill my bones even as I type this. This happened probably 15 years ago. Please drive carefully, everyone. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.